So my name is Ilan Axelbank. I'm a labor organizer with Socialist Alternative, and if everybody wants to introduce themselves too.
Sure, my name is Moore, and I am a Starbucks partner and on the organizing committee in Buffalo, New York.
And my name's Gianna Reeves. I am a Buffalo partner at Starbucks. I am also an organizer with Starbucks Workers United in Buffalo.
And I'm Kshama Sawant on the Seattle City Council, also a member of Socialist Alternative, and also a rank and file member of the American Federation of Teachers, Local 1789.
Cool. And we are going to be having a conversation about the fight to unionize Starbucks across the country and various things related to that. So I'm very excited for this. But I was thinking maybe we could start with something that is on a lot of people's minds right now, and it's being talked about in the media. You know, we're almost 2 years into the pandemic. Work has been even more difficult and more, crappy in a lot of ways than it already has been even before COVID. And a lot of people are quitting their jobs. In fact, so many people are quitting their jobs that in November, 4.5 million people quit, which is the most people that have quit their jobs in a month in any recorded history. And I'm not much of a Reddit guy myself, but I hear that there's a Reddit channel called the Anti-Work subreddit that has 1.7 million people on it. And basically what they talk about is how much they hate their jobs and all of the terrible things that their bosses make them do. And they post a lot of the screenshots of the ways that they're quitting their jobs. Have you guys seen that?
Yeah, I follow that subreddit.
Yeah, cool, okay, awesome.
There's these really exciting text message threads where they tell the bosses,
Exactly.
I'm not going to accept disrespect, I'm quitting.
Exactly, and it's completely understandable because workers are facing a terrible situation in the workplace right now. But it's interesting because you guys are taking a different approach than that. And so in the housing, in the fight against gentrification and the fight for affordable housing, Socialist Alternative and other organizations have used the slogan, "Don't move, fight back," when talking about fighting gentrification. And I wonder now, in the midst of the Great Resignation, as they're calling it, should the labor movement and us as activists take up a slogan of "Don't quit, organize"? And so I just wonder if you guys could talk a little bit about that and what you would say to Starbucks workers, other coffee industry workers, food service workers, all workers who are, not happy with their situation at work now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've found myself saying that exact phrase so many times to people where I'm in the anti-work subreddit just because it's interesting to see how the workplace has evolved and how commonplace these actions are, these exploitations and the abuse thrown at workers. But to see it in Starbucks only chats on Facebook where people are like, I don't know what to do, I'm at my last straw. I love the company and I really enjoyed when I started, but I'm just beaten down. And I've commented, don't quit, organize, contact us. We can get you to somewhere where you have the power to change your workplace to what you want it to be. And that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a worker leader in Cleveland, Ohio, actually, who I loved her quote. She said, "There's a lot to lose from quitting, and there's nothing to lose by organizing." I have to credit her, Maddie, in Cleveland, Ohio. She said that. But I think it's really true. I think this, as you said, the pandemic has highlighted that the current economic system we have right now, it doesn't work for most people. The vast majority of people, actually, and people are saying, I can't do this anymore. I can't work 3-4 jobs and still barely be able to afford rent. I don't see my family. I can't take care of my kids. I don't have a life. This isn't living. And I think people are seeing that organizing unions is a way to say, enough is enough. We're standing up and we're fighting back, and we're gonna stand together collectively, and we're gonna demand a better workplace.
Gianna and Casey sort of hit the nail on the head, which is that there is no better job to go to for tens of millions of American people. We can quit, yes, and that's completely understandable, and we have so much compassion for that feeling because we're all so beaten down in these dead-end jobs, which, far from tapping into our creativity, they actually sap our soul, and there's so many soul-sucking jobs. And then on the other hand, you have really jobs where you take pride in it. Baristas take pride in your job. You enjoy talking to your customers, providing that wonderful coffee that everybody appreciates, which we've been appreciating all morning. But then you don't get paid enough. You get exploited. You don't even get basic workplace sort of conditions that you need as human beings. And it's tempting to just quit. But where do you go? Starbucks is not an isolated corporation. Amazon is not an isolated corporation. This is capitalism, and most people's lives suck, and so there's nowhere to run and hide. We need to organize.
Right, and I feel like something that's so important about what y'all have done in Buffalo and what's happening nationally, just generally with Starbucks, is that people want to do something. The problem is not that people aren't upset, that people, just think that everything's fine. Very few people think that everything's fine, but I think a lot of, workers needed to see that it is possible, that you can fight back and you can win. And I think now that that's happening, we're seeing at dozens of Starbucks locations across the country, and certainly more to come, that people aren't quitting. They are, they're not quitting and they're organizing. So I guess just on that note, a question I have is, as people who were kind of at the forefront of this, wave of unionization, what does the beginning of a union drive look like? Like, what does it look like to get together and be like, hey, we're not happy with the way things are at work, we're going to come together and organize? What are the first steps? Was there a straw that broke the camel's back for you guys? Or just, kind of paint a picture for other Starbucks workers and other workers about what this process is like.
Yeah, so I mean, the beautiful thing about what's happening right now is that Starbucks partners from across the country, here in Seattle, from Buffalo, we just had Ithaca, New York, like our backyard just launched a union campaign as well, have been reaching out.
And that was like 10 minutes ago, right? You said that right before the
I
interview,
just
right? That's awesome.
coordinating with some folks back at home because there's so much action happening. We're like, whose letter's gonna be posted first? We have so many we have to post, which is a good thing.
That's awesome.
But the exciting thing is we have people reaching out where people like Gianna and myself and other people in Buffalo and now across the region get to hop on calls with partners and say this is what the process is, and obviously unfortunately we can't say that because then Starbucks would come in and start their union busting without us even having the chance to organize. But what we've been able to do is really give people the tools and the resources to start this campaign first underground at their stores and then go public, so then they're prepared and ready. Because unfortunately what we've seen is that Starbucks is launching this national crusade against unions, and people have to be prepared and know how to, because we can fight back and we're winning despite the union busting. But it is a lot. It's psychological warfare that they're playing with people when you have managers who you have relationships with pulling you off the floor and saying in one-on-one meetings, I will be personally heartbroken if you vote yes to this union, and then crying.
Oh, did that happen to you?
That didn't happen to me, but I know that that's happened at various
That
locations.
is psychological warfare.
Absolutely, that's their game, is that they try to wear us down, and then even if we were a tight-knit community before the union drive, even if we are still a tight-knit community during the union drive, they pick us apart and try to find who they can wear down with insecurities and fears of losing benefits, fears of hurting the people that they have grown to care so much about. And it is despicable. Going back to the questions about what it looks like when you first begin, there's a lot of public uncertainty because, like you said, a lot of people needed that kind of spark. They needed to see that it was possible. I remember we'd always watch this one news outlet and they'd always be like, oh, if Starbucks wins, they're not gonna, and then right towards the end she's like, I don't know guys, I think they have a pretty good shot at this. And then we didn't win just one store, we ended up winning Genesee and Elmwood, and that just exploded. I mean, there was something electric about going to the first organizing committee meeting with people, and we all just sat together in a group of chairs, empty office, and we just started going on and on and on with this big old board, this big old notepad about what we want to change about Starbucks. If we could change what we wanted to about Starbucks right now, what would we do? And it was just...
What were some of the things on that board?
Some of them
I'm sure there were
funny.
a lot, but...
Some of them were man, every August we just get bees and wasps in our stores. I've been stung. And they're like, no way, you haven't been stung. I've been stung. And I was like, really? I had a partner go to the emergency room because they were stung so many times.
Jeez.
Just funny things like that. But then also, health and workplace safety was what we ended up getting out of that. Of why is this continuing to happen? Why is this being allowed to happen? Things like seniority pay, where you have partners that have been with the company for over a decade of their lives, but people come in and they're making less than $1 in between the two of them. It's unacceptable. Because we care about each other so much, we can rally around these injustices done to each other because it's all being directed at all of us, no matter what. Even if it's one person, that's affecting every other barista on the floor.
And you guys, you should talk about the incredible victory you guys won.
Yeah, so a few weeks ago, the Elmwood store, which was the first store that had the confirmed victory, the first unionized Starbucks store in the United States that's corporate owned. I mean, we're in the age of Omicron right now, this huge surge of COVID cases, and the company wasn't providing anything like N95 masks. They weren't paying for people to isolate if they had been exposed to COVID, but they were vaccinated. So if you were unvaccinated, you got to stay home and be paid for that. But if you were vaccinated, you were fine. Even if you were directly exposed to COVID, you still had to come into work. I mean, there were people that with the CDC recommendations now, with the 5 days, they were still symptomatic, but people were saying, oh, you already had the 5 days off, still come into work, even though they were symptomatic. So over a third of the store was out due to COVID safety related concerns at Elmwood. And they came in one morning and there, was some workers there who felt so pressured to come in, even though they were facing health risks, that they should have been seeking medical attention. And the people that were working that morning said enough is enough, we're walking out. And they all decided in solidarity together to walk off the job. And that started a 5-day strike at the Elmwood location when they demanded that, the company provide things like N95 masks. And what ended up happening was they ended up going back to work that Monday, and after the strike, now Starbucks announces this nationwide, company-wide policy where people are paid to self-isolate if they're exposed and vaccinated, whereas that wasn't the case before.
Yeah, it's an absolutely massive victory, and
you can see this in countless other places too. And for example, Cleveland, Ohio filed about a month ago, and they filed on a Monday, and then on Wednesday, the entire district was moved to grab and go, and they closed all the cafes down, whereas before the union effort, it was open. So this is just what happens with the mere threat of a unionization campaign. Like, that shows the power that we hold. Imagine what we could do if we actually had more unions, or that's the power of what standing together does for people.
absolutely. And I wonder if one thing that's been happening is and we saw this in Mesa, Arizona, right, where they had filed for an election, hadn't had the vote yet, but they were, at the same time that the Elmwood strike was happening, and they were demanding the closure of the store. Mesa, Arizona was demanding the closure of the store temporarily for Omicron, and they granted it. And you're saying in Cleveland, Ohio, they granted some concessions after filing for an election. And it feels like the company is trying to, oh, you don't need a union, listen, we're doing, these nice things, because what they're also doing is, after the strike in Buffalo that won this enormous, enormous victory, they're not saying, we were talking about this earlier, it's not like they're saying, oh, okay, fine, they went on strike and we'll give this to them. They're making it seem like they just did this independently, but in reality, that victory was won on the picket line, was won, via workplace action.
They've always, throughout the union drive, have consistently done exactly that. One of the things that we have talked about pretty consistently is seniority pay. And during the middle of our union drive, a couple weeks before ballots were released.
It was like the day before.
Yeah.
The day before the ballots were sent out.
They released a statement saying that Starbucks was going to...
They launched what they described as a $1 billion investment into workers. Where
and when was this, sorry?
This was a day before our vote. The ballots were sent out for the first 3 stores.
Wow.
So they are raising the entire minimum wage to $15 an hour across the country by, I forget the date, by a certain date in the next months or years.
To all their stores nationwide?
Nationwide,
Yeah.
and they implemented a very small seniority pay. I think they said up to 5 to 10%, depending on how long you've been at the company.
Is unprecedented for Starbucks to do. And
Right.
this is still another achievement that was founded
Yes.
based off of our collective action, standing together
Well,
to say this is unacceptable.
And we've said from the start, if Howard Schultz could give every barista organizing in Buffalo from the beginning $1 million and stop the union, he would have done it, I'm sure. Because he knew that, they all knew that once this happened here, that people would get inspired and want to do it for themselves.
I mean, these companies are terrified of unions.
Yeah.
They are just absolutely terrified. And it reminds me, I was a little less than a year ago down in Alabama for the Amazon union drive that took place in Bessemer, Alabama, at the big warehouse there. As soon as those workers filed for their union election, I remember Costco and a bunch of other warehouse corporations in the area all raised their wages by $2-3 an hour, because they were like, oh my God, I don't want a union, coming to my company. And again, it just shows how terrified they are. But just to go back to one thing that we were saying before, I forget, somebody said, I think you both said it's psychological warfare, this union busting stuff, and it made me think it's psychological warfare as a vehicle for class warfare, right? Like that's what's behind the whole thing, and this union busting stuff that they're doing is just utterly insane, and I think we need to continue strategically, to spread the movement, we need to continue to shed more light on the union busting that's happening. And so I'm curious about your guys' strategy in Buffalo of how you fought back against the union busting, how you overcame it. In Boston, I think actually today at 2 p.m. In Boston is some of the first anti-union meetings, like captive audience meetings at some of the stores there. And so, for Starbucks workers who are starting to face this at their stores, when the executives are coming and there's a captive audience meeting, do you boycott? Do you show up in force and challenge, the executives? What's the approach in one-on-ones? And just if you could offer some guidance to other Starbucks workers, to how to stand up to union busting.
Yeah, probably one of my favorite things is when pro partners and members of the organizing committee do show up, and if there's no one else there and it's all just pro partners, they've just canceled meetings and gone, no, we're not actually going to do it today. The turnout isn't good, when really the turnout isn't the people that they want. So absolutely, folks that are pro in their stores have to show up to these meetings. They're not fun to sit through, but you have to, because then you have an opportunity to stop this misinformation and these dangerous lies that they're throwing at workers, that they're totally trusted to take as truth. You're stopping it in its tracks. We had instances, Genesee Street was really fantastic about confronting and directly opposing misinformation spread at their anti-union meetings, where they all were together beforehand before they went into the meeting and discussed, okay, if they say this, this, and that, we need to call them out on this. And if they stop one person from talking, we need the next person to talk, because they can't tell all of us to shut up if we're the only ones at their meeting speaking. So there'd be instances where they'd love to use the line of well, if you join a union, if you get this union through, you might end up with more benefits, the same benefits, or you might even end up with less benefits. Who knows? We're just learning about unions. They were kind of using that facade of not knowing in order to spread information that just simply wasn't true. Not real information, just threats.
Right.
And the workers there just stood up and said, what do you mean? We're not going to be signing contracts with anybody that says that we're going to have less benefits than we already have. We need to have more, and we know we're going to vote on more. Right. So are you the ones saying that you're going to give us less benefits? And kind of turning the switch, because then they realized that they backed themselves into a corner. And they were like, whoa, 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 no, that's not what we're saying, that's not what we're saying. And getting really good at using their own language against them, because they're not used to it. They're so freaked out by it, especially with how we present publicly. When we're tweeting, when we're discussing things in interviews, we care about Starbucks, and we're trying to uphold ourselves to the standards that Starbucks does not uphold themselves to. And it drives them wild, because they know that they're going against everything their company is supposed to stand for.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is that their union busting is completely predictable,
That
so
too.
it's out of the union busting playbook, 101. So, we've been able to prepare people with what to expect with these, and I think regardless of what a store decides to do, whether that's to decide collectively that they're going to challenge what the managers and district managers and HR people are saying, whether they're going to do that together or whether they're going to say nothing, or whether they're not going to show up. As long as they're choosing to do that together, I think that's what people need to do. And they're just digging themselves in holes in these meetings and just showing really their true colors at the end of the day.
Buffalo's an interesting case because we were the first. We knew that what they were going to do was nothing creative or groundbreaking as far as union busting. It never is. But we got to see what strategy they were going to choose. And now that we've seen it and we kind of know what plays they're going to enact, we're able to connect and contact other locations across the country and tell them and give them the heads up of hey, so you have time when this happens. Right now, they're scrambling. They are tripping over themselves because they just don't know what to do with all these stores. They can't keep up with the momentum. But eventually, when you get one store or somewhere like Boston now where they're finally having a captive audience meeting, they know what to expect. so they can have their plan ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, that's really important, what you guys are talking about, like, painting a real picture of what it looks like on the ground for the workers to be subject to these captive audience meetings, and how do you counter that. That's really exciting, and also correct, to hear how courageously the workers are countering that by, sort of boxing the executives into the corner by, pointing out the lies. And I think another thing that comes to my mind also in terms of, how to fight this kind of union busting, one of the best antidotes that the whole history of the American labor movement has shown is to show our fellow workers what it is that we can concretely win through having a union. Like, one of the most common talking points, like you said, there's nothing new or creative. This is garden variety union busting. It's been going on for decades. And it rears up its ugly face when there's a union fight, fight for a union. It's always there, dormant, and now it's coming out in the open. And one of the most common tactics they use and talking points they use is, oh, the union is just going to take your dues and not do anything for you. I was just reading an editorial from the Wall Street Journal 2 days ago, which is in response to your fight, actually, the Starbucks union movement is prompting all these corporate newspapers to write these things, and they say the union, the workers might like unions today. Unions are very popular right now, but it's not really. They don't really know what they're getting into, and the union just wants your dues. And I think one of the things that history has shown is the best antidote to that talking point is to show what the union can win, like you showed with the incredible victory around COVID and all the things that people were writing on the whiteboard. Like, what do we want? All these conditions to change, and one of the conditions, of course, that workers are demanding is living wages. And I think you guys have been talking about, it's just, we can't just live, we simply cannot live on the wages we're paid. We need at least $25 an hour, and compare that to Kevin Johnson getting $20 million last year, Howard Schultz having over $4 billion of wealth, and he lives in this district, by the way.
Kshama's his city councilor, which we were talking
I
about
don't
that
think
last
he considers.
night.
I'm sure he
no.
voted for you.
Yeah, right. Don't think so.
Yeah.
But on something that you said, Gianna, of just like, they're literally going against, what they stand for, at least ostensibly. I was looking up earlier, and I actually remembered, what was this, I guess now 2 summers ago during the Black Lives Matter uprising, they produced shirts. I don't know if you guys were working there then, but they produced...
I wasn't working, but I remember
Okay.
seeing the uproar, the absolute...
Yeah, they produced Black Lives Matter at Starbucks shirts or whatever. They sent them out to stores across the country, and on Starbucks' website it says they quote launched an internal series of courageous conversations that creates a safe space for bold discussions addressing difficult topics and to help increase understanding as part of this Black Lives Matter. And these are just, to me, it's courageous conversations, safe space, bold discussions. These are just woke buzzwords that corporations are starting to use to try and take the heat off of themselves and pretend like they're sticking to their progressive, messages.
Well, I was going to say, and the only reason they did that is because they co-opted that. They actually told workers that they couldn't wear Black Lives Matter
Exactly.
items in
Oh,
the
wow.
store. Yes.
Well, that's why this whole thing started, is because of the backlash, right?
Right. So the workers stood up and said, "This isn't right. We should take a stand on this," and the company completely ignored us. And then it was only after customers raised a big concern that they said, "Oh no, we were pro Black Lives Matter the whole time."
And
so it was a complete reversal. That it was they were not pro Black Lives Matter from the beginning. They were only pro BLM after. Not workers,
Or at least
but
they're
customers.
saying they're pro BLM,
Right.
because of the backlash.
And this
Whatever
is
position makes them money.
Yeah.
And this is something that we're seeing nationally, I think, of corporations that will hang the pride flag out of their window, or they'll put Black Lives Matter here. But when you have a workforce, especially, the Starbucks workforce, disproportionately young, certainly disproportionately LGBT, identifying as LGBTQ and queer, when you're union busting, or a disproportionately queer workforce, there is nothing progressive about that. There is nothing LGBTQ friendly about that. When you're saying workers can't wear Black Lives Matter pins at work because it might piss off a racist customer, that's not progressive. And so it's just, I think the way that you guys have fought back, and not just you, but Starbucks workers nationally are fighting back around this, really shows the way forward for how to take on this kind of new era of woke capitalism.
You nailed it right there with saying woke capitalism. They're just trying to leech out as much money from issues that people actually care about and lull people into thinking that they're actually doing something to create change when in reality all they're doing is keeping everything at a standstill
Right.
and just racking in the dollars.
And Kshama, you have had tons of experience dealing with, either, woke capitalism, but also, you just defeated this recall effort, and there was a lot of so-called progressive elected officials that didn't support you against this right-wing recall, but like, what is some of your experience with, woke capitalism and stuff?
Yeah, I think what we've observed in the 8 years that we've been on the Seattle City Council is very similar to what you're describing. I mean, the role that these corporate executives play in the workplace context is the role that many of the politicians, Democratic and Republican alike, obviously there are differences between the two, but it's overwhelming to see what role the Democratic Party politicians play in very left-leaning or progressive cities like Seattle. Like, on Seattle City Council, I'm one socialist, there's 8 Democrats, and even though this recall campaign against my office was funded by Republican donors, in fact, a record number of Trump donors were behind this campaign, the charges against my office, very falsified charges, they were really part of the nationwide backlash against BLM, or the reaction against the BLM movement and the uprising. And despite all of that, not one of the Democrats on the city council, they're all self-described progressives, not one of them said anything against the recall, not a word about supporting BLM in order to actually defeat these Trump supporters and Trump donors. And it's really just one of the many examples that we see of where there's all the woke buzzwords, as you said, Ilan, and really the actions are completely the opposite. I mean, we were just at this press conference that we all did together at the Starbucks headquarters, where we were joined by a worker at Trader Joe's these workers are angry because this woke Democrat-dominated city council eliminated the hazard pay, or attempted to eliminate the hazard pay for grocery workers. And today that bill is coming back for a vote, and workers are saying, we're done with these words, we want action. Are you actually going to be on our side?
Totally. I'm curious, like, we're talking about Black Lives Matter and all of that. Like, were you guys part of the protests a couple years ago, or were a lot of your coworkers part of the protests 2 years ago, or other movements as well? I mean, varying ages within the Starbucks workforce, but we were talking at the press conference earlier about the Fight for 15, which started 10 years ago. That was one of the first movements I know that I got involved in a real way. But also, I mean, the first round of Black Lives Matter, now 6-7 years ago, after Mike Brown was shot in Missouri, the anti-Trump movement after Trump got elected, the Bernie Sanders campaign, there was that New York Times article, which I'm sure you guys saw, unionizing baristas inspired by Bernie Sanders. But have you guys taken part in any of those movements, or your coworkers? And if so, or even if not, but you watch them, are there any lessons that you guys would have taken from those movements and think that need to be brought into the labor movement and unionizing Starbucks?
I mean, the labor movement and the civil rights movement are so interconnected, you can't have one without the other. So I think that's my answer. It's all,
Short and sweet.
You can't have one without the other. We're all fighting. You can't be anti-racist and be anti-union at the,
And you can't be pro-union while being a race. I mean, you can't end
all of these
oppression
things. That's what with Starbucks. They like to say they're pro-LGBTQ. They like to say they're anti-racist, and you can't be those things and then be anti-union. It doesn't work like that.
Right.
So I mean, of course, all these issues are intersectional. So the Black Lives Matter movement, that has to be a part of our movement. We have to stand in solidarity with racial justice, and it's all interconnected. So I would say absolutely, and I think a lot of people that are involved in this organizing effort were probably activists, maybe climate activists, or Black Lives Matter activists, or part of the Sunrise Movement, or all of these different things. And I actually think that's one of Starbucks' downfalls, is they hire people who want to unionize.
That's
they're hiring these young people who are Bernie Sanders fans, or who want different. And so you can't have this brand of progressiveness, then want to hire all these people, then be like, oh wait, what? You guys want a union?
Yeah. They want the illusion of this woke, progressive, young, fresh, hip coffee shop, but then when we actually try to enact it, they're like, well, no, not here though.
Yeah.
Go do it on your own time outside of work.
It.
Yeah, we don't. We stop.
Well, it reminds me, Karl Marx said that capitalism produces its own gravediggers, right? And it sounds like you're saying that Starbucks has produced these workers with this mission and who they're hiring or whatever, that then they get on the shop floor and they're like, actually we're not so happy with how things are going, we want to change things.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't call us gravediggers ourselves, but I'm sure Starbucks would probably
well, that's
try
what I'm
to
saying.
paint us as that,
like,
for sure.
Gravediggers of,
When we're
sure,
saying we're revivifying Starbucks
Right.
in a way our partners from 8 years ago said, yeah, this company used to be something. Like, it used to have a little bit of that charm to it. It used to have its morals in line with its work. And now you just see the decline and just the greed kind of overtake the need for treating people like people, to treat their workers like human beings, as they are, as we all are, and they simply won't. I mean, so many of us are just so passionate about social change, even if we haven't been active in campaigns outside of this. For me, this is my first big sort of action politically or socially, just because on one hand I am fairly young for doing this, I guess, as I've been told I'm a baby, but on the other, this is...
Babies can be unionized.
Babies can be unionized. Unionized babies.
Put it on a poster.
But that's like, we have found the thing that we need to start. This is our jumping off point for a lot of people, and for others, this is just another thing that they say, yes, this aligns with everything else we need to do, whether it's civil rights, whether it's gay rights, whether it's everything. Everything
Right.
culminates together, and we're all willing to stand with each other. The only people that are standing against are corporations like this, because they don't want us to be in one collective unit. That's their worst nightmare, when all we want is a voice and a seat at the table, and that is the most threatening thing for them.
Right. I wonder, Kshama, as somebody who has definitely participated in a lot of movements, over the last several years, what do you see as some of the lessons that you've learned, through just being a socialist, being a socialist city councilor, being a member of Socialist Alternative? Like, what are some of the lessons from Black Lives Matter, the Fight for 15, Me Too, Bernie Sanders, the anti-Trump movement, all of these things that could be taken into the labor movement now, as we head into 2022 and this colossal, important struggle to unionize Starbucks?
Yeah, first of all, just to echo what you said, this is an extremely important struggle, and it is important for us to win victories, which means actually have a company-wide union for Starbucks workers, and then head to the next battle, which is to win a fair contract, which we all know is going to be a major fight. I think it is important for us to harness a lot of the lessons that I think we've all seen, and not all of us may have thought about it consciously, but I think we're all thinking individuals, and we're observing the world around us, right, and understanding, for example, why is it that the $15 an hour struggle in Seattle was able to win, and then build that into victories in Minneapolis and Boston and Chicago and many other cities, and why is it that maybe other movements didn't have successes like that to show for themselves, and why is it that Starbucks workers are having so much momentum? What are the correct things that we should be doing? What are the things that we should be soberly learning? Like, maybe this didn't work that well. And I think all of that, there's a lot to talk about, obviously, but I think if you want to just boil it down to some of the most fundamental lessons, I think that really is underlined by two key things. One is, are we going to have a fighting class struggle approach, or are we going to have this idea that, well, you know what, if we ask nicely, or if we try to build unity with the people who are against us, because we are told that if we don't do that, we're not nice, then maybe we can win. I think a lot of these movements, all the examples you gave, Alon, I think they boil down to that. When we won because the people in the movement, working people like ourselves, understood that the only way to win is for us to organize workers and do it boldly and unapologetically, and not accept, as you said, the psychological warfare of, oh, if you do this, you're breaking my heart. If you do this, you're not a nice person. Rejecting those lies and boldly fighting for things, that is when we won. And I think that is why it's no coincidence that we won $15 an hour, that Starbucks workers are winning victories, and the West Virginia teachers won such incredible victories, because they had the courage actually not only to fight against the Republican-dominated legislature, they had the courage to call out their own higher-up union bureaucrats who were wanting to make a backroom deal that was not going to be in the interests of the public school workers. And they had the courage to call that out openly. And I think that is what sort of stands in contrast. And I think it's also, again, no coincidence that during the BLM movement, there were 26 million people, especially millions of young people, who walked out on the streets, making it the largest street protest movement ever in US history. But when we have to have a sober assessment, right? When we look at the victories won by BLM, they are not commensurate with the strength of the movement. And one of the reasons I think that many people are starting to realize is that actually, you know what, wherever we go, whether it is elected officials or in the labor movement or in social movements, we need to really put forward ideas of what it means to have accountable leadership and a strategy for winning. And I think that's where it comes down to.
So speaking of strategy for winning, I actually want to ask you another question real quick. So how long have you been a union member yourself for?
Since 2010.
Okay, cool. So over 10 years, and you've obviously been involved in many labor struggles before being elected to office and of course after. And, I think we were talking a little bit about this last night too, but there's broadly two types of, approaches to building the labor movement. You have business unionism and class struggle unionism. And I'm wondering if you could just kind of explain the differences between those two, and then if we could just have some discussion about that, I think that would be cool.
Yeah, I think business unionism, unfortunately, at this moment is a practice that has been mostly in place inside the labor movement for the last several decades, and it's a result of it's a little bit like what you all were talking about in terms of how Starbucks executives are reacting to the push for a union, where they're trying to appear nice and they're trying to give little things to you all as gifts so that you'll stop fighting for larger things. I think that's the approach that has been used by the capitalist bosses for the last 50 years. And what's happened is there's a whole sort of move inside the labor movement where many, if not all, there are really wonderful union leaders, and that's who are supporting the rally tonight and the leaders you're working with. But we also have to be honest as union members ourselves to understand that actually many union leaders actually have gone towards what's called business unionism, which is basically trying to see their role as union leaders as trying to find unity between the bosses and the workers, rather than understanding that their job is to actually put forward fighting demands and really provide a strategy for workers, for the rank and file members to fight against the bosses, understanding that this is not something that you can make peace between the bosses and the workers. Capitalism is set up as us versus them. And we have to reject this idea that, well, if you talk about class struggle or if you talk about us versus them, somehow that makes you a bad person. No, actually, if we want to be a good people and if we want to actually do good for humanity, it is our responsibility to understand that the system itself is posed in this contradiction, where if Howard Schultz makes another $1 billion, it comes out of your pockets as workers. So it is basic mathematics. It is a zero-sum game. If he is gaining more billions, you are losing out. And that if we want a just society, then it does mean that we cannot have a billionaire-dominated agenda. And I think that is something that we have to draw out as members of the new upcoming labor movement. I think we have to fight for unions, and inside the unions we have to fight for democratically organized movements, rank and file driven agendas, where we have the interests of the rank and file that is predominant, not making peace with the bosses.
And do you guys have thoughts about, are these terms, actually I'm curious, are these terms you've heard before, or regardless, I'm sure we've talked about it too, you're familiar with these concepts, obviously, and I think you guys are really embodying a class struggle approach to building the labor movement, which is so sorely needed. So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, we've seen it time and time again. We've been asking politely and begging for a couple of years recently to Starbucks to change something, give us better something, please, we're doing your surveys, we're talking to our managers, we're taking every avenue that you've given us in order to express what we can now, which is very little, and nothing's been done. So now we're here and we're demanding, because we have no choice but to demand, because they won't do any of this out of the kindness of their hearts, as they so like to say. It's not in their agenda. They're there to make money. They're there to make capital off of our labor. That's just the name of the game for them. They're a business. And they're a business that's shown that they would rather exploit humans for monetary gain. You know, where you have workers going through COVID pandemics, where we're the ones delivering N95 masks to our partners when they don't provide anything.
And then baristas are waking up at 4 a.m. in the morning to go do their morning shift. And these executives are sitting safely at home. They're not having to go anywhere, let alone wake up at 4 a.m., right?
It's incredible how they're so quick to go on the offensive to us and say, how dare you say that we haven't done anything for you guys when we've done this, this, and that. And it's like, why do we have to settle on it being that when everyone says, oh, Starbucks is the best in the fast food industry? You know, like they have this and they have healthcare, and it's like, but you don't see that there are still so many workers that apply for Medicaid. And you have instances where people are just like, just settle, you know? That's what it comes down to. And you can't settle because then they'll slowly start to rip things away from you because they realize you're complacent.
Right.
And when you're complacent, you are easier to manipulate.
Right.
And we have stood up and said, we will no longer be manipulated by you. And we will no longer be your coffee robots.
Right.
And that's what makes them upset. That's what makes this a class struggle at the end of the day, rather than making it more so a business model of things, because the business model is not the human model.
What about you, Casey? I'm curious your experience and thoughts on, you know, business unionism, class struggle unionism. And we were talking last night a bit about, you know, it sounds like Starbucks Workers United does function differently from a lot of other unions. You were saying how you guys decide everything. You know, you guys are the ones, you know, who are really the ones making the decisions at the bargaining table and in strategy. And you have all these committees that we were talking about. And I just think that's important, and the world needs to know about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, because, you know, Starbucks is a lot better than a lot of companies, but just barely. And I think that's one of the reasons that you have people who've been working there for 8 years, 9 years, 10 years. And I think at the end of the day, what has been so appealing about unionizing to a lot of people is to really have that seat at the table, to have a say in what goes on in our workplace, and to make it a truly democratic workplace. And so we have been organizing partner to partner. Partners are the ones forming a bargaining committee that will sit at the table with Starbucks. You know, obviously we have lawyers, just like everybody needs lawyers to fight against union busting and things like that, but it's not the lawyers who are gonna win the provisions that we want to see in our contract. It's gonna be the workers. And so that's been really important to us, is to have a movement that is run on the ground by workers. And like you said, you know, having workers run our social media, workers talking to Starbucks, helping fight union busting, making the decisions for strategy for bargaining and all of these different things. So I don't know if I have as an ideological view of things, but I do know that, at least from my perspective and what I've seen be successful, is that it's worker run and worker driven, and people deserve to have a say in their workplace, regardless of if they're an hourly worker or not. So
Well, so I think before we go to just the last couple of questions, just real quick, Kshama, we had a press conference this morning. You're proposing a resolution to the Seattle City Council. Can you just explain a bit about this and how, you know, you're a left-wing, a socialist elected official. How can other progressive and socialist elected officials across the country help this unionization wave?
Yeah, as a socialist city council member and as an elected representative of Seattle's working people and working people as a whole, we take our responsibility, political responsibilities, extremely seriously. And when there's a struggle like this, the movement of Starbucks workers, it's really important that socialists especially, but all progressive elected representatives take a stand. You know, this is not a situation where you can be neutral. There's a question here, which side are you on? Are you on the side of Starbucks workers who are fighting to get unionized, fighting for their workplace rights, or are you on the side of the Starbucks bosses and executives and Howard Schultz? And so this resolution that we've brought forward for a city council vote, and it will be voted on in the next couple of weeks, is a resolution that says that the Seattle City Council urges Starbucks to cease its union busting efforts and allow the workers' card check neutrality, which means basically if you as workers collect majority votes for union, then you get to have a union without intimidation, without lawsuits, without other kinds of threats like the captive audience meetings and so on. And the resolution also urges Seattle's workers as a whole to unionize, and also urges Starbucks that when the union is formed, that the workers be allowed to push for a fair contract so that the overwhelming wealth that's generated does not go in the hands of just the bosses and the major shareholders. So this is a very important resolution, and it's part of the fight, really. That's why, it's really crucial that you both came here from all the way from Buffalo to support this resolution, to stand with your fellow partners here in Seattle, and that if this resolution wins, it could be the sort of the bellwether for other council members or other state representatives nationwide who say they're pro-work or pro-union to also do the same thing.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think both of us are members of Socialist Alternative and Democratic Socialists of America, and you're one elected official. DSA has 150 elected officials across the country, and I mean, imagine if all DSA elected officials put forward a similar resolution in their, city council, state legislatures. We have, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
We should be demanding Congress members do this, absolutely.
Exactly, and so I wonder if, maybe we can discuss further actually how we can, get other socialist elected officials to do a similar thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's important that we do things on smaller scales like this, because if people are going to go, oh, you can't get the PRO Act passed, don't bother. It's like, okay, then we'll go smaller. It's like, what do you mean go smaller? It's like we can do this city by city. We've been organizing Starbucks by Starbucks. We can do the same thing with their legislation. It needs to start somewhere. And to just say, oh, it's to this, we cannot have a Goldilocks situation here on our hands, or we will never have the perfect conditions. We need to act. And that's what you're doing. And God knows we appreciate it, and we hope it sets a precedent for the rest of the
Absolutely,
DSA.
Yeah. And this is the kind of actions we want from our elected representatives. It doesn't mean anything to say you're pro-worker. You have to do things that are pro-worker.
Right, and the want and the desire to unionize is there. What we need to condemn is Starbucks union busting, and that's what we need politicians and people of power to say, is that we won't accept this. We are going to hold you accountable, Starbucks.
Right.
And it's not enough to just say, good job, workers, go ahead, good luck. It has to be, no, Starbucks and this union busting crusade, it's unacceptable. We're not going to tolerate it.
So I have one last question, and then we'll go to a bonus question for those who are still listening. I think it's now over 30 stores have filed for a union election?
I was just thinking about that, because we were just at 30 stores yesterday.
Plus Ithaca.
Was the 30 stores, I think we must be around 33 or 34 right now.
So it's climbing, and I think what we're seeing is the graph is like that, right? It started a couple, and now at a certain point it's really going to, I think, escalate, and we're going to see, it's 33 stores now. By the end of, next week could be 55, then 100, and ideally, hopefully we get to thousands, at some point and unionize the whole store. But of course we know that unfortunately once you get a union, the union busting doesn't end, right? And the corporation will do everything they can to drag out the contract fight, to say, oh, well, we can't do that, we can't afford that, all sort of, that kind of things. And so now the main question is, how can we unionize as many Starbucks as possible? At a certain point, the question becomes, well, how can we win a strong contract? And so, I was looking up that for new unions, only 14% of new unions win a contract within the first year. And I think that can be, that could be interpreted as demoralizing, as, oh man, but I think we shouldn't take that. I think, in the Starbucks movement, we should take that as a challenge, that we're going to do that. And how can we fight as strong, as hard, and as smart as possible to win strong contracts? Yeah, what are thoughts on strategy for contract fights?
I mean, I think you're right. Actually, our number one priority right now is to get a contract, because ultimately that's what we need to be able to hold them accountable for things like just cause for termination and things like that. And that's, we've said from the start, we only need one store to start to show that it's possible to break their anti-union back. And now we need to show that, we can have a contract, and that contract will likely be the template or the inspiration for other stores that can unionize. So it's absolutely the biggest fight right now. And that's where we have to put pressure, because Starbucks does care about their image as this progressive company that they like to say they're pro-partner. And if they don't come to the table and bargain in good faith with us, then we just have to continue to put pressure and say we won't accept this. You know, they clearly listen to their customers more than their workers. So,
Absolutely.
you know, we need not just DSA folks, but we need, you know, liberal folks and, you know, everybody who goes to Starbucks to say that we won't accept this union busting, and you know, what strategies that turns into as time goes on will be like a bigger conversation as we go to the bargaining table. But I think the continued pressure, it's not a good look, Starbucks.
It's not a good look, absolutely. And like you said, we always talk about breaking the union busting back of this company, and we're pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, but we need it to absolutely we need them to lie down, and the only way to do that is to keep doing what we're doing, keep having these discussions, keep gathering more people and showing them that this is vital. We are reinvigorating the labor movement by doing this, and one part of getting this contract, it doesn't just need to be the fact that we got a contract. It needs to be one of the best contracts we've ever seen, because we need to prove that this is something we can do, and we can do it well. This is not just we skated by and we're getting through this by the skin of our teeth. We're going to win. We have the confidence in Buffalo, in Seattle, in Richmond, wherever, you name it. We know we can do this. So we just need Starbucks to, I wanted to say cut the shit.
Yeah, you can
I can say
curse.
shit.
In this interview, you can curse.
Then
Cut that
yes,
and repeat
as
it
frankly, Starbucks needs to cut the shit then.
then. Yep. Well, I like winning, so
I think
that
that we
sounds
need
Yeah.
to
good.
make a button.
Cut
Yeah,
the
Starbucks
shit.
cut the shit. That's right. Did you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the way you all have already demonstrated winning this victory through a 5-day strike, and as you said, Casey, Starbucks had its own press release where they're pretending that they are doing this out of the goodness of their hearts, but we know, and we have to make sure we educate our fellow workers that this is absolutely the result of the 5-day strike action, which actually resulted from the workers in one store saying, we're just walking out, this is enough is enough. I think that it's a really good sort of guideline for us of what we will need in terms of winning a contract. And I think Starbucks has already sort of shown some of its cards, and it's not a surprise to us. This is a behemoth of a corporation. It's a multinational corporation with nearly 9,000 stores that are company owned, and then of course if you include the grocery store, there's over 15,000. And so for a company of that magnitude, they can easily afford to close down a few stores that are unionizing if that is something that keeps the whole union battle in check. And that's why what you all are doing, I mean, the count of all the dozens of stores that are already announced that they're unionizing, that's so crucial, because there's no way we are going to head to even the situation of a contract, let alone winning that kind of contract that you described, Gianna, which is absolutely, I want Starbucks workers to win that kind of contract, but we are only going to get there if the unionizing struggle itself shows workers what we are going to need for the contract battle. And part of the strategy, of course, is for hundreds, thousands, as you said, Ilan, we need thousands of stores to announce, workers at thousands of stores to announce that we're unionizing. We need a coordinated strategy, as you all are building. That's why it's important that you are from Buffalo. We're sitting here in Seattle. Ilan is from Boston. We're building a coordinated strategy here with community solidarity, with us from the community having your back. I think this is going to be crucial for the contract fight also. I mean, as we said at the press conference this morning, no real contract has been won at the bargaining table. It has been won because of the actions taken by workers outside the bargaining table. Strike actions obviously is most crucial. It's the weapon that the working class has to assert our own position in the contract battle. But it also comes down to all the really important lessons we've learned from the West Virginia teachers strike as well, where they took building community solidarity so seriously. They took building unified demands, demands that unified not just teachers on every school campus, but all public school workers. I think those are the things that we're going to need. And you've already shown some of the examples of what can unify people, Starbucks workers. And I'm really excited to talk about, in the coming months, to talk about concrete things that can really win the majority of majority of Starbucks workers to the idea of a union. And I wanted to just echo what Casey was saying earlier, which is that, what brings workers to the union movement, to the socialist movement, is not ideology. It's about real lessons that they learn through the experience of living under capitalism,
Yes.
dealing with their shitty bosses, since I'm allowed to say this on this interview.
I said she's allowed to
Yeah.
curse.
I'm not allowed. I'm sorry.
I won't curse if she can't curse.
Yeah.
That's solidarity.
Yeah. So-
Solidarity with profane language.
Exactly. I mean, it's the experience of life under
Right.
capitalism, right? Like, what brought you here to this point? It's observing how terrible it is that you work all day and this is what you get. Your fellow workers are suffering. We want to do something. And so I think those concrete questions will also come to the fore. And, as socialists, we call them demands. But I think this is something that echoes with workers all over. Like, what do we want in Starbucks, for example? Living wages, the right to do scheduling and other things that you need in order to have an actual workable day. We need COVID safety. We need freedom from harassment, sexual harassment, and other types of intimidation on the job. These are things that a lot of people are going to agree with, and so we need to build the union fight and the contract fight on that basis.
And just one thing I'll say too on this question of taking the unionizing struggle into the contract fight is, it used to be, so the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, was only founded in 1935, and of course that's not when unions began, right? But before then, and when the NLRB was founded, that's when, it began to be that you could win a union from an election, right? Before then, workers had to strike in order to get a union. And oftentimes the strike where you would get a union was the same strike where you would win a contract. And so the struggle to form a union and win a first contract was the same struggle. And so, once the NLRB was established and you started to be able to, unionize through an election, I think in some instances it can appear as two separate struggles, that you unionize and then in this other thing you win the contract. But I think what you guys are both saying, especially what you were saying, Casey, that the priority is to win a first contract because that's how we can, continue to spread things further. I think that's so crucial to see the two as not separate, but how can we, build momentum for unionizing and carry that momentum into fighting a contract and even doing the two at the same time. And so, so now the bonus question is, I've heard that you faced off with Howard Schultz, who's the
Word
former
on the street.
Yeah, word on the
Word on the
street,
street.
exactly. That Gianna Reeves has faced off with, $5 billion billionaire Howard Schultz, former CEO of Starbucks. And you were just, the story is awesome, but from the green aprons to Roseanne Williams trying to stop you and all of that. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us the
I
story.
can't even say it was a face-off because as soon as I spoke, Howard turned to face away from me and run to the
Sure.
door. There was in Buffalo a partner event that was really just the Howard Schultz talk show for why we're ungrateful and we shouldn't unionize. And the first thing you see when you go down to this event in downtown Buffalo at a Westin is corporate members of Starbucks on the corners of the street, wearing green aprons, fresh out the pack, directing people to go to the parking lot, which we later find was not paid for as they said it was. We all got trapped in the parking lot later. Really set the tone.
And they didn't validate your parking.
Yeah, exactly. There was nothing. It was very, it was so poetic, just already starting off. And so it just felt very dystopian. And it's same thing when we went into the main event where we're getting checked in, everyone's like, hi partner. Like, we're so happy to have you here. We can't wait to tell you about all our amazing benefits, like Spotify Premium. And even still, while you're at the door, they're dead naming partners. They're causing so much pain for people without even noticing, without blinking an eye. They're like, this is just another Tuesday. What do you mean? We're being great. You should love us. Why don't you love us? So this event's going on. There's small plates and Pike Place all around. And Casey comes up to me and has a copy of our fair election principles that we've been trying to get Starbucks to sign since day one, so they can hold themselves to a higher moral value and give us the rights to a fair election that the law does not protect us with. So she had a copy with her and she goes, hey Gianna, wouldn't it be crazy if one of us stood up and said, asked Howard Schultz to sign this after he speaks? And I was like, yeah, wouldn't it? So eventually they all call us into the little circle of chairs, And it almost felt a little like a face-off of, we had our organizing committee shirts on, and then you had the corporate folks in the audience wearing the green aprons, and Howard Schultz goes on, and the highlights of his speech are a completely inappropriate Holocaust analogy, discussing the crisis of capitalism as a billionaire, with your audience being working class citizens, and that we should be grateful because nobody asked Starbucks to give us benefits, to give us what we already have.
And just to clarify, Howard Schultz said the words, the crisis of capitalism.
Howard Schultz said the crisis of capitalism. You can see it for yourself because Starbucks released the whole speech thinking that that would help them.
Right.
That'd be like, no, look at the context.
Howard Schultz is the crisis of capitalism.
Yes. And so he gets up to leave, or gets up to like sit down in his chair so the closing speech can occur. And I have the paper in my hands, and I have one of our partners and organizers in Buffalo, James, sitting next to me. And I know behind me I have Casey and Jazz and so many people, and Lexi. I just knew that I had people that I've been fighting with and that I've been fighting for just standing there with me. And I like kind of whispered to James, like, should I do it? And they nodded and was like, go for it, like, do it. So I stood up and I got as far as saying, Howard Schultz, my name is Gianna Reeves, before he turned tail.
I am a barista. I am on the organizing
I said I am a
committee.
barista and I am a human being, and that must have taken offense because that's when all the corporate lackeys began to stand up in the same circle, and I had to like, it's so odd saying I had to juke around corporate lackeys at a Howard Schultz event in Buffalo, New York because they're union busting. If you would have told me that was a sentence that would have occurred a year ago, I would have laughed so cynically. Like, what are you talking about?
And we saw that happening in the video. We showed us the video last night.
And you can hear, like, the president of Starbucks North America, who's been, at that point, scrubbing toilets and sweeping floors and trying to gain favor in Buffalo for weeks at that point, go, Gianna, please, now's not the time. And it's like,
Pretty sure now's the time.
yeah, now is the time, because otherwise you won't allow us to have a time. That's why I'm demanding time.
Right.
That's why we're demanding a union.
Right.
So the whole thing was just so indicative of everything that Starbucks does and says, where they're two completely different things. Oh, we care about partners. That's why we're having this event. That's why we're doing this. We love you guys. Here are all the amazing benefits that maybe you don't take advantage of. When we are right there in the same room saying you are not hearing us, you are not listening to us, you refuse to listen to us. These benefits are not accessible. These benefits do not help us, they help your image. So how can we make it so that we are actually pro-partner? And they said, sit down.
Disgusting.
Disgusting.
Yeah. Okay, well, that is an awesome and crazy story, I think, to end this conversation with. I guess just the last thing I would say is thanks everybody, for watching. And, this fight is very much just beginning. We have a lot more work to do ahead of us. And just to say, I think, Socialist Alternative is absolutely here to do everything we can, to support your struggle in Seattle, in Buffalo, nationwide. And I read out the statement from an international Socialist Alternative member at the press conference earlier, who's a barista in Northern Ireland, that internationally we want to do everything we can to help this struggle. And so maybe let's just leave it with, I think, two phrases that came up during our conversation, which I think are apt, as next steps is, one, don't quit, organize, and two, Starbucks cut the shit.
That's pretty
I concur.
Yeah.
Cool.